Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jeff Hall from the Front Porch and from the Combat Arts Academy, and I'm here to discuss with you the importance or even necessity of simplifying complexity or complex ideas for analysis. Phenomenologists might be inclined to argue with me about the nature of complexity over time, but I'm just here to give you a historian's perspective on the phenomenological experience of time as it relates to understanding. And before going any further, I would recommend checking out Boltzmann's formula and the formula for Shannon entropy. Basically, as entropy increases over time, so does complexity because of the nature of change, the potentiality of distinct microstates, and everything going through that process from point A to point B. Essentially, over time, entropy increases, creating a greater number of potential microstates. While we know this in theoretical math terms, we also know this experientially. Why is that important? Well, as I have posited before, humans have a measurable and predictable tendency to overestimate their ability to identify problems or to understand the degree of complexity of any system or anything that they're studying. This is why I'm an advocate of investigative distillation, the process of deliberately reducing analysis to constituent elements, or the subject of your analysis to constituent elements. And there's no wholly right or wrong way to do this. Don't waste too much time trying to perfectly parse information. It's rather more important to focus on the analysis itself. An example of this is studying combat from the perspective of ancient warfare or from boxing. If you want to distill sound principles, you need to do it by first removing all the extraneous elements. Well, what does that mean? I'm glad you asked. That's why we're here right now. There are poorly conceived counter-arguments to this, and they fail to understand the intent of the exercise. These counter-arguments often come from the camp of the regrettably uninformed. The regrettably uninformed are the people who I think, unfortunately, are most likely to overestimate their ability to identify problems or analyze information. One of the reasons we should practice concept reducibility is to eliminate the desire to search for monocausality. Those who do not deliberately reduce complexity for analysis will unwittingly reduce complexity by defining monocausality with false parameters. Simplification will either be deliberate or unintentional, but it is either way inevitable. So what does that mean? That means people are going to be reductionist because that's how the brain works, right? We categorize everything. We organize information in our head, whether we mean to or not. And it's better to be on the front end of doing it deliberately than it is to just allow it to happen, because what'll happen is there's always that haughty guy in every class or in every board meeting or in, whatever type of organization you're in that says, oh, well, this is obvious. X is obviously because of Y. And very rarely, if ever, does that person ever fully understand the complexity of the context of the events or the actors or the relationships between them that are happening. And so they come up with some very simple answer, and then they try to solve a problem with a completely incorrect or inapplicable means. And we see it all the time, right? We see organizations come up with policies, and then when they see that those policies do not adequately fix whatever problem they're experiencing, they just create more policies. Well, that is making more complexity in the environment. That puts more stress on the systems existing in the environment, and it demands more resources. And then these disparities in the efficiency of the problem and the problem-solving process, well, the disparity between doing it correctly and incorrectly creates new problems, therefore creating new resource requirements, therefore increasing complexity. And this has just happened over time from the beginning, however you believe that beginning came about. So, understanding how clearly deliberate reduction is distinct from rote reductionism is important. Accounting for as many variables as possible helps aid in this process. Essentially, grouping variables into generalities, a process we do automatically in many cases, will eliminate or at least reduce unnecessary complexity. How is this relevant to history, you may be asking? Again, I'm so glad you asked. Trying to understand every aspect of events today requires too much computing power for any one person. There's just too many variables. And if you take into account like the deliberate obfuscation of information that happens, with like secrecy, whether it's corporate or whether it's a government, it doesn't really matter. When people are trying to ensure that you don't know their secrets, then there's a narrative created. There's usually a counter narrative created by the enemy or by the opposition party or faction to whatever organization you're talking about. And there's usually some sort of truth between those two different narratives, hopefully. Unfortunately, because of the search for monocausality and oversimplification by people who fail to deliberately reduce the complexity of the thing they're trying to understand, we have conspiracy theories. And while I will give some credence to the idea that many of the conspiracy theories that have been posited in recent years have been validated one way or the other or verified, we still have to make sure that we don't get lulled into a false sense of understanding where we say, all right, well, we don't have the technological capacity to replicate a thing that happened in the past. Therefore, aliens must have done it. There's an entire network on television today dedicated to talking about how aliens basically created all human complexity, right? They came along and fed us mushrooms or injected us with something and made us smarter, or they did all the technological feats of the past for us. Hokum. We need to understand that everything we encounter is more complex than we can reasonably assume to understand. Therefore, we have to break things down and remove extraneous information and try to investigate constituent elements. And when you do that, you give yourself a better method for examination. But because of the necessary computational power to be able to do a thorough investigation like that, it's either going to require a lot of contemporary resources, like you're going to have more than one person doing things simultaneously, concurrent task organization and management, or it's going to require a smaller number of people, a much greater amount of time to be able to parse the information, examine constituent elements, examine relationships, examine systems, examine the potential for information removal or for an absence of information or evidence. And you have to be able to take those things and then re-aggregate them into a narrative which is going to be contextualized by the person assembling the information by just the packaging of trying to determine what information is necessary, and then also by the delivery of the information, and then ultimately the reception of whoever the reader or the consumer of that information is. It's a lot of lensing. And as much as we may be compelled to approach problems when we really kind of understand how complex all information requirements are, we might have an internal desire to say, all right, well, this is, I'm going to take the nihilistic approach and say that none of this is important because I can't have an absolute understanding. Well, that is also hokum. When you become nihilistic in your understanding like that, then there's no point in doing anything. And so, I think it was Beyond Good and Evil when Nietzsche said, the only question is whether one should or should not kill thyself. Well, at the end of the day, like if you have a completely null and void desire to understand the world around you, I don't really know why else you would exist without some sort of external compulsion from God or something. But I don't know. Maybe I'm I don't know. I don't even know what word that would be. Anyway, before I get too sidetracked. So there are too many variables for one person to have a total understanding of. Oh, I ended that sentence with a proposition. Please forgive me. Preposition, not proposition. It's been a long morning. There's too much obfuscation of information. There are too many tertiary or tangential factors interfering. Therefore, we must use a simpler analog to lens our approach, or to at least inform our approach. In this regard, the boxing ancient history approach becomes useful. Modern combat employs the use of myriad munitions and tools, which ultimately must be accounted for, but their use is essentially for the same reasons as they have always been used. Missiles are missiles, and they're called missiles for a reason, right? Whether it's a throwing axe, whether it's a spear, whatever. At the end of the day, we still use these things for the same essential reasons. And when you fail to understand that, then you fail to see the utility of history of understanding modern strategy or modern warfare. A good example of this, the easiest way to defeat your enemy's superior cavalry is to kill the horses in the barn, or the plains at the airfield, or to burn down the barn itself, to destroy the airfield. These types of vulnerabilities are frequently missed. Powers waste much time by failing to see these things. It illuminates the folly of relying on superior horses if the enemy stops the horses from being able to affect the combat itself. A squad of sappers can remove an entire division's worth of aircraft and can ultimately remove the enemy's capacity to influence battle in one of the dimensions of war. It is a matter of strict fact that human ingenuity and or deviousness are evolutionary boons in this regard. Whimsy and fickleness create behavioral unpredictability. This will save us from evil robots in the future, just as it saved us from predators and evildoers in the past. History may be a poor predictive indicator, but it's one of the only ones that we have. Particularly, it's one of the only ones we have that has any modicum of utility or veracity. Interpretation and application are often in the realm of reading tea leaves when it comes to that type of practical predictive analysis. But even so, you can take maths, like Peter Turchin does a lot of predictive analysis when it comes to population. And he did this really fascinating study about why Europe became so bellicose since the 1700s. We really have to be deliberate in our approach. And I know I've probably said the word deliberate 19,000 times since I've been talking in this little video, but deliberate thinking, again, I really think is kind of the key to sober analysis. So anyway, I hope you've at least enjoyed the beginning of this discussion. This is a topic I'm going to return to on both my channels, the Combat Academy channel and the Front Porch, because I think it is important to have a grasp when it comes to being able to simplify information to analyze it better. And then you reassemble the information and at least have a different perspective, and I think you should always arm yourself with more perspectives. Anyway, as always, beware the dangerous amateurs. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and beware the snowstorm that is impending for the East Coast. So, I'm Jeff Uhall from the Combat Arts Academy in the Front Porch, and have a great weekend.